today we're going to talk about 3 ways that you might be giving up control of your entire financial future. So stay tuned. You're going to want to hear this. So why would I bring this up? Why would I bring up the fact that we as society have now started to build this habit of somehow relying on an outside source to make our financial goals come true? And the thing is that notice I didn't say financial dreams. These are goals. These are actual goals that I think we take for granted, first of all, but we also leave it in other people's hands. And here are 3 ways that you might yourself may not know it. So let's talk about financial goals. First of all, most people who have financial goals, usually they want to build wealth, okay? And the thing is that is a very common goal, by the way. But in order to build wealth, you have to understand what is that comprised of. Now, wealth is not like a big house. Wealth isn't your fancy car. Wealth, if you were to look at just the proper terminology, could be your net worth. What are you worth at the end of the day? If something were to happen to you tomorrow, what would you be leaving behind? That would essentially be wealth. Okay. Now, what is net worth? If we were to go back to accounting 101, net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. Okay. So the only way you can increase your net worth is if you increase your assets or decrease your liabilities, right? So increase the value of your assets or reduce your debt, basically. Reduce the money you owe to the banks, to people, to CRA, all that. Okay. So what a lot of people do is they take the chance of losing all of their wealth by not really getting to know how they can protect it first. And so I'll give you a really good example, a very simple example. I've seen a lot of GoFundMe pages on social media. And unfortunately, it has a lot to do with trauma and tragedy. Most of the time, people were not prepared for a tragedy to happen. Nobody really is prepared. And whether it's tragedy or planned, the thing is that all of this kind of takes money, unfortunately, right? It's not free to bury a loved one. And that's just one example, okay? Or if somebody is ill and they can't work, so their source of income to pay the bills is now all of a sudden left to chance because they have to getting better from their illness. That's another example of a GoFundMe page where someone has found out they have a life-threatening illness or an illness that just causes their financial income to just go down the drain because they somehow relied on what most people do. They rely on their employer. They think they have the employer benefits that will help them get through something like this, which is interesting because I think most people don't even know what they have through their employer. That is one really clear example of how one person might leave their financial dreams and goals in the hands of an outside source, is thinking that your current employer has your back in case something tragic happens to you or your family members. The second way people think or rely on an outside source is, this is interesting because I think this would probably be more common, but anytime I've asked, when I used to work at the bank, anytime I've asked, do you have an emergency fund? And most people would actually call their credit card or their line of credit an emergency fund. And I'll tell you this, at the banks, that's how they sell it. I don't know how many of you guys have walked up to the counter because you had to do some banking, or maybe you just had an appointment with your banker and you've been pre-approved for a line of credit. And they've somehow told you that you have such a great history with the bank and you're approved for a $20,000 line of credit. I've been a victim to that as well. And I always thought, it doesn't hurt, just in case. Just in case, right? That's the emergency funds. They sell it that way. Yeah, sure, just in case. But how many times do we sit down and accumulate $20,000 for the just in case? So most of us, if not all of us, rely on debt as an emergency fund. So that's like saying, if anything happens to me, I'm going to borrow from somebody else. Right? Now, yeah, that's somebody else is the bank, but it's still an outside source. It's not within your control. In fact, you would actually have to pay more money if that was the case because they charge you interest. So that is the second way we rely on outside sources to help us build our wealth, right? Because we're talking about your assets minus your liabilities. If something were to happen to any of our assets, somehow we pull from our liabilities to help us out, which is odd because all that's doing is decreasing your wealth at the end of the day. And the last way that we rely on an outside source to help us build our wealth, and you may not know you're doing this, is you rely on inaccurate information to help you build your wealth. Meaning, you might get information from sources that say you don't need insurance because you can save up for that. You can save up for the day that something happens to you. There's something wrong with that statement because you have no idea when that day is going to come. That's why you have insurance, right? Think about it. If you drive a car and you have a license, you're required to get insurance. We have no problems doing that, sometimes paying $200-300 a month to have insurance so that we can get from point A to B in a vehicle. But for some reason, that's more important than making sure that we haven't taken care of our obligations if something were to happen to us. And now if you're a vampire and you're immortal, I can see why you would have that perception of what life is. But if your family or yourself have ever been touched by some sort of tragedy, like an illness in the family or a sudden death in the family, you know that can take a huge toll on someone's finances. Some people have this perception that, you know, if I pass away, somebody else will take care of it. And I suppose that's true. Somebody would have to take care of it. I would be very sad to say that most of those people who say that probably don't have a lot of people that they actually care about too much, because why would you say that if you didn't care about the people you're leaving behind? You're leaving the burden behind. So you're misinformed about how much it costs, not to mention the fact that they have to mourn you, but they have to deal with the fact that they have to take care of your financial affairs when you leave this earth. So why don't you make sure you take care of that as if tomorrow is your last day? Because then you've just given peace of mind to the people you leave behind, not to mention yourself, that you're not leaving this earth being somewhat of a bad memory, really, at the end of the day. But sometimes a tragedy isn't ending your life, is not the end of life. Sometimes it's actually getting sick is way more probable than just all of a sudden passing away. If you were to ever get disabled or critically ill, God forbid, you're still here paying the bills. You still have to pay for that mortgage. You still have to put food on the table. You still have to support a family if you do have one. And the thing is that, what do you do if your employer doesn't have enough insurance for you, or your income either reduces substantially or goes away entirely? Do you have enough savings in your account to comfortably just take out if all of a sudden you couldn't work for 6 months because, you know, you somehow tweaked your back and all of a sudden your job requires you to be able to use your back and you can't? So you go on disability. How do you know if you haven't looked into it. So we rely on the goodness of other people for GoFundMe. We rely on the banks in the form of debt. And then we rely on other people to somehow get us out of a hole that if you just thought it was a possibility, you would be prepared. So I hope I left you with some things to think about. And I realize you can't unsee this video now. And I hope that you really take a very hard look at your existing wealth, your existing net worth statement. If you haven't, please click on the link below. I'd be happy to walk you through that. It doesn't have to be a very long conversation about what you think is a challenge in your current financial situation. Anyways, I got you all, and have a great day.